The Galactic Council, in what it called its infinite wisdom, had logged the species known as humans under designation 734, primitive, PRE warp, pacifistic. It was a simple entry in the vast concordance registry, the cosmic tome that I, High Archivist Thrax, am sworn to maintain. For 200 cycles, this was accepted as fact. Human delegates always spoke of a deep-seated fear of war, a cultural trauma that supposedly made them incapable of real conflict. Their own historical records, shared with an unnerving transparency, were filled with tales of brutal self-destruction, followed by a time they called the Great Unification, a period of profound regret and a vow to always seek peace. They were harmless, a quaint species to observe, but never to fear. Their merchant ships stuck to the safe lanes, their diplomats were relentlessly polite, and they always asked for entry into the wider galaxy with humility and cooperation. The Council saw weakness. They saw a species so scarred by its own violent past that it had effectively neutered itself, forever terrified of its own shadow. That was our gravest miscalculation. As the keeper of the galaxy's knowledge, my duty is to record the truth. And the truth is this: we didn't understand the difference between a prey animal's fear of a predator and a predator's fear of its own rage. We were about to learn. My job as High Archivist has always been one of quiet observation. I sit high in the Citadel's gallery, my 6 eyes scanning data streams, my hands poised over the concordance's crystalline interface. I'm a witness to history, not a maker of it, but even from my detached perch, I felt a current of unease whenever the human question came up. Their story just felt too perfect, too rehearsed. A species that clawed its way to the top of its own death world, a planet teeming with savagery. By their own admission, doesn't just shed its nature like a skin. The real test, of course, didn't come from council debates. It came from the void, cloaked in the brutal certainty of conquest. It came in the form of the Xylon Imperium. The Xylons were everything humanity claimed they weren't: unapologetically aggressive, an ancient warrior race whose empire was built on subjugating others. The Council, for all its posturing, handled the Xylons with a careful mix of appeasement and avoidance. They were a problem for another day, a sleeping Leviathan, but the Leviathan got hungry. Looking to expand with minimal resistance, the Xylon Imperium cast its predatory gaze upon the outer systems, and there, nestled in a stunningly beautiful nebula, was the human colony of Elysium 7. It was a soft target designated by the Council itself as militarily insignificant. A planet of scientists, farmers, and families, protected by a token militia and the galaxy's firm belief in their pacifism. The attack wasn't a battle, it was an extermination. Xylon dreadnoughts, hulking monstrosities of black metal, didn't bother with invasions. They activated their atmospheric incinerators, weapons so horrific they were outlawed by conventions the Xylons never bothered to sign. From my station, I watched the real-time data. The life signs of Elysium 7, all 1.2 million of them, just flickered out. The planet was left a sterile, blackened cinder. Having made their point, the Xylon fleet moved on without a single lost dot in the Citadel. The response was depressingly predictable. The Council convened. There were somber speeches and grand pronouncements of sorrow. The Xylos delegate, a being of pure energy, pulsed with a gentle, regretful blue. The Gathar ambassador clacked his mandibles in a traditional sign of mourning. They all spoke of the tragedy, the barbarism, and the sad, inevitable fate of a species that feared war. It was, they concluded, a grim lesson. The human ambassador, a woman named Anyashama, was called to the floor. We expected tears. We expected pleas for aid, for retribution. We expected a broken species to throw itself at our mercy. She offered none of it. She just stood in the center of that grand hall, her face a mask of cold composure, as she listened to the platitudes and the patronizing condolences. When the final speech ended, she simply gave a sharp, tight nod. "Thank you for your time, esteemed members," she said, her voice unnervingly level. Then she turned and walked away. No tears, no begging, no outrage, just a silence that was louder and more terrifying than any scream. I recorded the event, my fingers marking Elysium 7 as extinct, but as I watched the human delegation file out, their backs ramrod straight, a shiver of ancient instinct traced its way down my spine. That wasn't the posture of defeat. It was the posture of judgment. In the cycles that followed, an eerie quiet fell over human space. Their busy trade channels went silent. Their diplomats were recalled from a dozen systems for a period of collective mourning. The Council saw this as proof they were right. The fragile humans, traumatized by their first real taste of galactic brutality, had retreated into their shell, broken. Their fear has paralyzed them, declared Grand Council of Orlag, his voice full of synthetic pity. They will likely never venture from their home system again, but the silence felt wrong. It wasn't the whimpering of a wounded animal. It was the stillness of the air before a lightning strike. My duties give me access to the deepest archives, including the unabridged histories the humans first gave us. The Council had only ever bothered with the summaries, the neat conclusions about the Great Unification and their newfound dedication to peace. I went deeper. I spent rotations immersed in the raw data of human history, and it was a litany of horrors. A catalogue of conflict so relentless and so inventive it made the Xylons look like unimaginative thugs. World wars fought with poison gas, trench warfare that consumed millions, civil wars that pitted brother against brother, and a Cold War that held their entire planet hostage under the threat of self-annihilation. They had devised 1,000 ways to kill each other before they'd even left their own gravity well, and then I found it, the records of their final internal conflict. They hadn't just stopped fighting. In a war that made their previous encounters look like minor squabbles, they had pushed their world to the absolute brink. They had stared into an abyss of their own creation. Their unification wasn't a philosophical choice. It was a survival imperative. They didn't fear war because they were bad at it. They feared war because they had discovered they were altogether too good at it. They feared what it unleashed in them, a capacity for total, remorseless, and brutally efficient violence. Their pacifism wasn't weakness. It was a cage, self-imposed, to contain the monster they knew they could become. While I was piecing this terrifying new portrait together, strange reports began filtering in. A Xylon listening post on the edge of the Veil Nebula went dark. The official Xylon report blamed a power surge. A week later, a Xylon patrol fleet vanished in the Traxian corridor. All 12 ships. The Xylons blamed a navigational anomaly. One by one, over the next 2 months, Xylon assets on the periphery began to disappear. Supply depots, forward bases, sensor arrays. Each disappearance was followed by a bland, almost panicked, technical explanation. The Xylons were trying to hide something, not from the Council, but from their own people. They were trying to pretend they weren't bleeding. I cross-referenced the incidents. The first listening post went dark exactly 1 month, to the day, after the attack on Elysium 7. The period of collective mourning, the period of silence, my blood ran cold. The humans weren't mourning. They weren't hiding, they were hunting. The reality didn't trickle in. It came as a flood. Without warning, every channel, every frequency, every display in the Citadel was hijacked by a single broadcast. It sliced through our security protocols as if they were nothing. One moment, we were debating trade tariffs. The next, we were staring into the face of a human we'd never seen before. This was no diplomat. His face was scarred, and his eyes held the cold, flat look of a man who cared about very little. His dark grey uniform bore an inscription, Fleet Admiral Santos. Behind him wasn't a plush office, but the stark, functional bridge of a warship. This is a message for the Galactic Council, he began. His voice, a low gravel that demanded attention. And for any who would mistake our desire for peace for an inability to wage war, the view behind him shifted to tactical footage. My 6 eyes widened. The ships were human, but like nothing registered in the concordance. These weren't the graceful freighters we knew. These were weapons. Jet black, angular, and utterly menacing, moving with a predator's purpose. There were thousands of them. A black fleet that had materialized out of nowhere. This is what humanity had been building while they talked of peace. The footage was a clinical montage of destruction. It showed the Black Fleet descending on Xylon military targets. There were no glorious ship-to-ship duels. Human ships didn't fight like warriors. They operated like exterminators. They used gravitational weapons that twisted dreadnoughts into screaming metal. They deployed drone swarms that devoured hulls like locusts. They fired lances of pure energy that caught out entire planet-side fortresses from orbit. We watched them systematically dismantle the Xylon war machine, not just the fleets, but their shipyards, their command centers, their refineries. It was a decapitation strike on a galactic scale, executed with a speed and ruthless efficiency that was simply terrifying. The mighty Xylon Imperium, a threat for 1,000 cycles, was being erased in a matter of weeks. The final recording was of the Xylon homeworld. The human fleet held orbit, a black garland of death around the planet. Then Admiral Santos's voice returned. On the colony of Elysium 7, he said, his voice dropping to a chillingly personal tone, the Xylons targeted our homes. They burned our farms. They murdered our children. We are a species that has learned, through great pain, the price of war. We value peace above all else. But there is one rule, one absolute law from which we will never ever deviate. You do not touch our children. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into the horrified silence of the galaxy. We offered the Xylons a chance to coexist. They responded by making our children scream. For that, there is no negotiation. There is no treaty. There is no mercy. The view switched back to the Admiral on his bridge. The Xylon Imperium is no more. Let this be the only warning you ever receive. The broadcast ended. The displays returned to normal, but the galaxy would never be normal again. The silence in the council chamber was absolute, a vacuum of pure undiluted terror. My hands were shaking. High Archivist Thrax, who had calmly recorded the fall of empires and the birth of stars, was shaking. I rose from my station and descended to the main floor where the Concordance Registry rested. The other delegates were frozen, their faces a mask of awe and primal fear. They finally understood. I placed my hand on the crystalline interface. With a thought, I brought up designation 734. The words primitive, warp, pacifistic mocked me, a monument to our own arrogance. I deleted the entry dot in its place. I typed a new classification for the species known as human. It was short, precise, and forged in the fire of a truth we had been too blind to see. It contained only 3 words. Do not provoke. We had made a fundamental error. We saw a species that had caged its demons and mistook it for a species that had none. We have now seen what happens when an outside hand breaks that cage. Humanity doesn't fear war. They fear themselves. They fear what they become when they are forced to fight. And now, for the first time, so does the rest of the galaxy. If you enjoyed this look into humanity's true strength, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories from the archives. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a transmission. Let us know in the comments, what do you think happens next? You can find links to support the archives in the description. Until next time, stay vigilant.